Party and Malaysian politics post-Sheraton move. With our speakers, YB Ching, YB Zairil Khir Johari, and Professor Meredith Weiss. I'm Ariel Tan, Coordinator of Malaysia Program at RSIS, and I'll be chairing this event. You would have seen our speakers' bios and their long achievements in public service and academia. But briefly, YB Ching is MP for Kulai in Johor. She has just been elected to the Johor DAP leadership as Deputy Chairperson in a closely watched race. She has served in the DAP's Central Executive Committee, or CEC, since 2008. She was Deputy Minister for Education during the Pakitan Harapan government. YB Zairil is Assemblyman for Tanjong Bunga and State Executive Councillor for Infrastructure and Transport in Penang. He was also recently elected to the Penang DAP leadership as Vice Chairperson. He has served in the DAP CEC since 2012. He is also a talented musician who plays in the rock band Priwayat, so please check them out on Spotify. Now, Professor Weiss is the Chair of Political Science at the State University of New York at Albany. She has published widely on social mobilization and civil society and politics and parties. Her recent current projects include research on local government and public goods delivery and youth politics. Her most recent work is The Roots of Resilience on Party Machines and Grassroots Politics in Southeast Asia, published by Cornell University Press. Prof. Weiss is deeply respected in research circles, particularly for her work on Malaysia. Through this event, we hope to get a better understanding of the DAP's current position with its base and general electorate, its role in the evolving political system, and its prospects for achieving its reformist and multiracial agenda with old and potential coalition partners. We are very lucky to have these three speakers with us today to help us understand all this from their unique perspectives. They will each make opening remarks and will then have a roundtable discussion before proceeding to Q&A with questions from the audience. My colleague Pia Sukani will moderate and relay the questions to our speakers. Please send your questions using the Q&A function. Keep them short so that we can work through them quickly. This event is recorded and may be made publicly available later. Now, YB Ching, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Talk about the challenges of DAP post-Sheraton. Talking about the challenges of DAP in PH government. First of all, before 2018, Pakatan Harapan, whereby we have four parties in it, DAP, together with PKR, Amanah, and also Bersatu, we formed a committee to discuss about the manifesto. And eventually we called it Buku Harapan, Books of Hope. I would say the manifesto committee actually is only represented by a selected few. So each party will send perhaps 2 to 3 people. However, when necessary, we will get specific people for specific party to actually work on the details. For example, I myself, I was actually in charge of drafting our promises for the women, and therefore, I would say most of our promises for women's, one of the autism in the Buku Harapan actually came from me after I summarized all the agenda Wanita Harapan Negara. I think one of the challenges we have is that even though we have a committee, we have a manifesto committee to work out the manifesto, but eventually it wasn't largely discussed among the MPs and among the reps from each party. And therefore, how many percent of the MPs really understood the content of the Buku Harapan, Books of Hope, and eventually understand what is inside the manifesto or what is not, and why we put it in the manifesto is something quite questionable. And this is something I think some mistake or some weakness that we should overcome in the next GE. So when we talk about, therefore, we have some issues we want to implement the manifesto promises. For example, UEC, because recognizing UEC, of course, is one of the key promises made by DAP. This is an issue that we have been campaigning with. And during the manifesto discussion, we are very happy because our coalition partners also understand. And therefore, I believe that people involved in drafting the manifesto, they understand this issue, and we eventually agree to put it in. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the elected reps within the coalition understand this issue well enough to actually give whatever support we need. And therefore, the timing for us to actually implement or to materialize these promises, i.e. recognizing UEC, is become questionable. For Tun, he thinks that we cannot be too rushed. We need to find a suitable time for us to implement this. And for Dr. Mazli, who was the education minister, he preferred to set up a committee to go through the issues involving UAC, and therefore come up with solution proposal, and then we can actually implement it together with certain certain conditions, etc. I think we formed the committee. It's a 3-man committee, and I think they are in their very last stage of finalizing the report. However, before they were able to submit the report to Tun M, who was the interim, or who was the minister oversee education minister after Dr. Mazli resigned. We don't have the opportunity to submit the report to him before the government collapsed. UEC is another Johari is another issue that actually the majority of us in the government, at least we think that Jawi script is actually part of the history of our national language, that is Bahasa Malaysia. And therefore, for us to put in 3 pages and we make it optional in the BN textbook shouldn't be that controversial. However, because the lack of understanding of the community, and then we also have media who fed on the issue. Eventually, I think it became a very hot topic within the community, and therefore it was I would say it's almost like a disaster for the AP. Many of our supporters and even our electorate did not understand the issue, and it took us. We need to make a great effort to actually explain the issue to the general public. At the same time, I think our coalition partners, they might not also understand why the community are strongly against it, and therefore we need to have more communication within ourselves. And however, on the other part, is about implementing these decisions on issues of interest to Malaysians in general, reforms and good governance, corruption, etc. I think on corruption and good governance part, because Tun Wen, he has a very clear agenda for Tun to actually join Pakatan Harapan and decided to actually work together with DAP, PKR and Amanah. It was because of the kleptocracy government and also because of the 1NDB. Therefore, for Tun, corruption is the biggest issue that he hoped to overcome during his term. And therefore, I think in terms of fighting corruption, pushing for good governance, I think we don't have that much resistance. Also talk about reforms, like for example, lower the age of voting, and also the other types of reforms, like the declaration of assets for the electorate and also the minister and also the deputy minister. We don't have much resistance, so I think this is a good side. However, for certain issues that involve certain issues that actually might have some controversy within the community, especially because of the racial tensions, I must admit that we have a big challenge. We have a very difficult time to actually explain the issue and handle the issue well. So I stop here first. Thank you.
Thank you, YB and Ching. Now, YB Zairil, please unmute yourself. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Ariel, and I'd like to thank RSIS for putting together this webinar. I've not seen actually most of you in real life for a very long time. I think Ariel and Meredith, it must have been years already since I last saw you guys. Ching also, to be honest, probably in the last CEC
meeting, some of our MPSA gathering.
These days in COVID life, you hardly see real people. So anyway, so I'll talk about some of the challenges that DAP is facing post-Sheraton. So it's been about 15 months, I think, since the Sheraton move. And what we have is a situation where, despite having no majority, the unelected government led by Tanjong continues to remain in power and is actually now ruling by emergency decree. But that said, I think anecdotally, it would, you would find that there is widespread disapproval for the government and the main personalities in the government. We're thinking of people like Azmin and so on. But despite that, the Pakatan Harapan, or our coalition, the opposition, we're not faring any better. I think that's the reality that we're looking at. And when we say the opposition, it's not just Pakatan Harapan that is, not exactly gaining public confidence. It's also the other groups in the opposition, Pejuang, for example, and even factions within UMNO who are against the government. They're not very popular. In fact, possibly the most popular or rather, government critic these days is the former Prime Minister, Datuk Sri Najib, ironically. But this comes really as no surprise, because what is the alternative that is being offered, right? Perikatan Nasional is not a great government, but people don't exactly have much confidence in the alternative as well. I mean, we have an opposition leader who clearly needs to improve his chess skills because I think his King's Gambit is not formidable enough. There is also a lack of clear direction. I mean, on the one hand, the people get mixed messages. There is this talk of cooperation with UMNO, but not everyone is on the same page. And then there's also the other problem of, if it's not Anwar Ibrahim, then who do you have? And really, we don't have good answers for that. So, I suppose that is the sort of general political situation, the landscape in Malaysia right now. There is disillusionment and apathy. And of course, to zero in on today's topic, I'll talk a bit more about DAP. So now, is there disillusionment and apathy among the DAP base? I think that's something that we want to talk about. So recently, I was in the market, here in Penang, and this uncle, I'll say middle-aged, maybe in his 50s or maybe early 60s, just comes up to me, right? And he says, Zairil, I want to tell you something. You have to tell your leaders, next round, you cannot contest only 40 over seats. You must contest at least 130 seats because we cannot rely on all these other parties and so on. You're the only one without frogs. We're talking about our parliamentary MPs. None of them have jumped. But what the point I'm trying to say is this guy is not a member of DAP, but I suppose he would represent what we would say our base support. I mean, these are guys who would support DAP very strongly. And I don't think there is disillusionment and apathy among the base towards DAP. Maybe towards the whole general political climate, yes, but against the DAP, not so. And if you look at the DAP state election results, I mean, our state elections have been going on since earlier this year, and quite a few states have already had results. Recently, Ching did very well in Johor. And I think the results actually show that the mainstream of the party still commands quite strong support among the DAP members, as among the DAP members, basically the real base, right? The membership. Of course, there are some elements who blame the leadership for cooperating with Dr. Mahathir, for example, which they say caused the downfall, and across the board, the grassroots. But I would say across the board, the grassroots do understand because the DAP, we have regular dialogues with members. We try to communicate as much as possible. And I think a lot of our members understand, sort of the challenges we went through in the 22 months in power. It's not so easy. However, I do agree if the statement is made that there is disillusionment among middle ground supporters. So, what I want to do here is basically make, draw a line between you have your DAP base, your membership, your hardcore support, but also sort of the middle ground voters. And I suppose these are the ones who are really feeling the apathy, the disillusionment, because they came from a really a big high in 2018. There was this epochal moment. You got change of government and you were full of hope and expectations. And but the problem is when you build up expectations, this is what happens when reality sinks in. But of course, there were many issues that they can themselves target. Ching brought up the Jawi issue. Particularly, there's also the UEC, the UTAR issue, and the manifesto. Generally, I think people feel perhaps we did not do enough when we were in power. So many urban Malaysians, particularly who supported DAP and Pakatan Harapan, I suppose feel burnt out and a bit fed up. This is no surprise. But, again, it's not really an unfamiliar situation, so to speak. And will this translate into, just a disastrous general election outcome for us? I suppose, it's hard to say. Because I always think that sentiments change a lot and very quickly in politics. They say 24 hours is a long time. It's a bit cliche, but it's true. I recall very vividly in 2016, and this is 2 years before the 2018 general election. And in 2016, we had the situation where our opposition leader, Anwar, was jailed once again. Nick Aziz had passed away and, Pakatan Rakyat split up. PAS was no longer in coalition with us, and PAS was basically our Malay base, right? Of course, DAP leader Guan Eng was being charged at the time over the Bungalow Gate issue. So, what were the prospects looking like in 2016? If you had asked me in 2016, how would DAP fare in the general election? I'd say probably we'll lose seats. It's just looking very ugly, and there's no hope. But 2 years later, we actually won government. So what I'm trying to say is things do change and can change very quickly. So I wouldn't say the situation here today that we have is reflective of what the general election outcome will be. In fact, I think far from it. But just generally, this is the situation that we have today. Now, I suppose the other issue or topic of interest regarding DAP would be, the Malay perception of the DAP, particularly DAP leaders, whether there's, deep suspicions among the Malays for DAP. Whenever asked that question, I always say, isn't that generally the base case? I mean, to say that there is no suspicion among the Malays towards DAP, actually, that would be the weird thing, I think. And this is the result of decades of demonization, which started from the 60s onwards. We're talking about 40, 50 years of mainstream newspapers constantly demonizing DAP leaders, blaming them for May 13th, blaming them for, almost all problems in the country. I mean, you can go back and look at transcripts of UMNO General Assemblies, and I think there was 1 year where an entire General Assembly over 3 days was dedicated to DAP bashing alone. We were the one and only bogeyman, with a few mentions of Anwar here and there, but it's just generally everybody was giving it to DAP and as if DAP is this big, Satan to the Malays. But anyway, that said,
Okay, YB, can you just wrap up for this segment, and then we'll come back to you? Sorry. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's true for all leaders of DAP. I think there are many leaders who enjoy a good reputation among Malays. You can think of names like Anthony Loke, who was very popular, even Bien, Stephen Sim, who is currently Flavor of the Month. And really, you know, just generally when I go down to the ground, I go down to Malay areas in Penang, I find, you know, that generally that isn't the case. That yes, you have all these constant demonization by politicians, by UMNO, by, you know, well, now Bersatu, in the press, in the media. But generally, when you meet normal people, and you know, especially if they know you, that really isn't the case. And we in Penang, we continue to have good support, which is why we have increased actually from 2008. Continually, there's an increase of Malay support at every general election. So, you know, generally, I suppose that's all I want to say as an opener, and we can discuss some more. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, YB. And now let's move to Professor Meredith Weiss. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, and thanks for inviting me to join this discussion. So the short version of my assessment of the DAP in and after the Pakitan administration is that the DAP did as well as could be expected, given internal and external challenges. So we've already heard from YB Ching and YB Zairil about some of those, but just to recap from micro to macro, we have the tension between a legacy Chinese base and a multiracial commitment for the DAP, which I think is sincere and operationalized, however challenging, and sometimes, including right now, challenged. Second, we have the tension between Bumiputra, but really Malay focus in Pakitan, given the inclusion, especially of Bersatu, and a less communal or non-communal premise. We have the tension, if not outright conflict, inherent in a commitment to a panoply of reforms in line with Pakitan's manifesto, and the fact that, as Niching alluded to, many in Pakitan, in government, apparently had not really read, let alone absorbed that document, or might not be fully on board with its tenets, just given the nature of its drafting, especially once it was actually time to govern. And then finally, the tension surrounding Pakitan's effort to make headway in implementing at least part of that really far-reaching reform agenda in the context of a mass of voters, many of whom either hadn't voted for Pakitan, it was a very narrow win in popular vote terms, or who may have very different priorities and preferences, or voters who did choose Pakitan, but only as a vote against Najib. And so, you know, there was a really difficult situation. So amid all that tension, the DAP was arguably the most consistent among the Pakitan parties in its advocacy of a non-communal progressive agenda, including such issues as restoration of local government elections, for instance, which is structurally a really important aspect. Yet because of the extent to which opponents will always code the DAP opportunistically as Chinese chauvinist, regardless of what the party does or who the party nominates, it was too easy to code that advocacy as self-interested, as anti-Malay, as really anything that was not disproportionately pro-Malay as being anti-Malay, and as probably the DAP's fault. And yes, I'm exaggerating slightly, but to make the point. And of course, there is still a pro-Chinese constituency within the DAP, as in that wants the DAP to be a party of and for Chinese Malaysians. So one can't just blame the party's opponents for that image's eternal life. But for the DAP to revert to a Chinese identity would seem to be a losing proposition. If it can't work for the MCA as part of the BN with all the spoils of office, there's no reason to think it will work for another party. You know, demographics alone mandate against that. And at the end of the day, the far more promising option really does seem to be a multiracial politics. And there is a constituency for that vision among programmatically oriented Malay as well. I think MUDA, however small and somewhat problematic as a party in terms of its premise, is a sign of the fact that there is really a future for that sort of politics within the Malaysian context. So post-Sheraton, the DAP has seemed to an observer to be lying low in terms of racial politics, to allow more Malay-inclined parties space and time to wall up one another unimpeded. So the initial sense post-Sheraton was that Perikatan Nasional would move quickly to implement a Malay unity agenda and approach, but that really doesn't seem to have happened. And indeed, infighting, as well as, of course, the pandemic, has left the coalition doing essentially fairly little beyond hanging on. We see more of the fine texture of gradations and what pro-Malay might mean than a coherent program. And we see above all how much personal ambition among a few key politicians from different parties can really scuttle any movement toward consolidating a coalition and a plan. So DAP has had some defections, but as Zairil noted, really not the katak phenomenon of other parties. Its factional splits are out in the open, as YB Ching noted. Some media will fan any flame they can find, but it has arguably fared comparatively really well among the major parties in Malaysia. At least it hasn't fractured to anywhere near the extent of Bersatu or Keadilan, despite the challenges it faces. At the same time, as Zairil has noted, there seems really fairly little forward movement on reconsolidating Pakitan. The biggest issue on that front is probably the hazy overtures betwen UMNO and Keadilan, which now it looks like are not going anywhere. But the coalition could be left with really little time to develop a proactive and shared program if elections are called soon. If developing and really internalizing a shared program did not work so well last time around for GE14, it's hard to see how, under the present circumstances, it will work better this time. So that brings us to what effect Pakitan's short rule has had on Malaysian political culture outcomes. And overall, I think Pakitan's breakthrough in winning control of the federal government has had something of a reset effect. The BN had become increasingly brittle and hollow as a coalition, and Pakitan's win shattered the BN's facade. There seems really little pretense now that the BN might even consider governing all by itself, even if it sometimes talks a big game. Whereas that had previously seemed the only plausible outcome. You know, it's informative to think back to say 2017, right? But since Pakitan also proved unstable, Malaysia's left without a dominant party. And for democracy writ large, that's really not a bad thing, but it does introduce and sustain uncertainty. So it could well be that GE15 ushers in a post-election coalition, whether on purpose or by accident, in the case of late-breaking reshuffling. And moreover, while we have certainly seen backsliding, for instance, in media freedom or in the vanishing chance for local government elections under Perikatan, even apart from curbs given with the excuse of COVID, a reform agenda has not vanished entirely. So that's what I mean by the reset button. For instance, there's a less promising environment for, but still percolating, efforts toward parliamentary strengthening and electoral reform, and the fact that the voting age will be 18 sooner or later. That said, I don't see much sign that Pakitan was able to break with patronage politics, whether in Perikatan's immediate leap into GLC appointments and the like, or for instance, Pakitan's own resistance to equalizing access to constituency development funds and similar reforms. Moreover, I don't see much sign that communal politics has been discredited or weakened, nor can DAP, as a still predominantly non-Malay party, claim the authority to press very hard on that, given Malaysian realities. What may be eroding the power of communal politics is simply the array of contenders for Malay votes, which makes clear how really unhelpful it is now to think in monolithic communal terms. So lastly, I've been asked to comment also on the impact of all these shifts on Malaysians' political consciousness and expectations. So on this front, I'm decidedly less sanguine, echoing some of what YB Zairil has said. That Pakitan wasn't moving so quickly as its reform-minded supporters wanted surely disappointed many, and it made clear that winning an election was just a starting point rather than an end goal. But the Sheraton move, especially coupled with Muhyiddin's imposition of emergency and suspension of parliamentary government since then, arguably really without cause, it's hard to see that in any way other than as self-serving and cynical, will likely have a deeply corrosive effect on popular faith and democracy. So put bluntly, if parties and politicians form and serve in governments in accord with the voters' decisions only selectively, that state is not a democracy, and citizens may as well not bother to vote, or at least that's the framing we risk seeing. So what tempers that bleak assessment, this is where I'll end, are two factors. First, that so many individual politicians continue to roll right along with grassroots service and other efforts, which might foster a personal rather than party vote, might encourage more patronage appeals. In other words, it's still suboptimal, but that does suggest that overall politics continues as it was in some ways. But perhaps more importantly, I do think it's significant that efforts within civil society to press on with civic education and related efforts that got a huge boost with Pakitan's win in GE14, that a lot of that continues, and a lot of the funding and support, institutional and otherwise, for those efforts continue as well. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor. Before we go to some of the questions that we wanted to go through, I would just like to respond to YB Niching's comment on media. I thought that the nature of the media, especially the Chinese media, the media landscape for DAP, the pressure that perhaps DAP faces from the Chinese media, that maybe isn't very available to English-speaking, English-reading audiences. So if you could tell us a bit more about the media landscape for DAP, the pressures, and also how the media relates to the overall Chinese base of yours. That would be very interesting. And for YB Zairil, I thought it was very interesting your encounter with the man on the street. It seemed that instead of maybe a certain sense of growing realism, your base or people who claim that they support you want you to go even all out and you know, so that's not surprising, because it's surprising and not surprising at the same time, because, you know, after what PH had gone through in 22 months, the pushback it had gotten from the, let's say, Malay majority, and yet your base expect you to go full steam ahead, and instead of, you know, perhaps wondering if more compromise and maybe a longer time frame for the sort of policies that it would like you to implement. So I thought, you know, that's something maybe you can tell us more about. Okay, and then you say that you know, we sometimes people are pessimistic about a party's prospects, and it has been the case with PH in 2017. But the change today is that you have been in government. You have been in government, so you're no longer the outsider. You know, the David versus Goliath figure. You have been in government, and in some ways you have not been found satisfactory, maybe to some people. And so, you know, perhaps that is a difference, right, in your situation today versus 2017. But can I invite YB Niching to tell us about the media? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think that's a very good point, because perhaps for non-Chinese speakings or readings audience, you might not understand the media landscape in Malaysia. I would say the media play, of course, a very important role for us to actually bring down Barisan National Government. That is something we must admit. However, at the same time, I think we all understand that before we have social media, before we have Malaysia Kini, printed media, they are hugely and largely controlled by the government because of the Printing and Publication Act. And they were very worried that their license will be revoked, etc. And therefore, most of the time, I would say most of the time, the media reporting, especially the printed media, they are rather conservative, or they take a safe approach. But what we see or what we observe during PH time was that sometimes I think our media actually take a very conservative, sometimes even a little bit chauvinist approach, and doesn't play the role to actually educate the general public. Because like Professor Will also mentioned, that civic education, I think, is very important. We need to we need to do more civic education in order to achieve our Malaysian dreams. So for example, Johari issue, when we were the government, Johari issue actually came out as a headline front page. Within a half year, 6 months, it came out 30 times. Appeared 30 times as the front page. And therefore, it is not surprising that at that point of time, I think 2019 until like end of 2020, end of 2019, Johari was a big issue. It was a big issue, as if like we don't have any more serious issue to discuss. And it's only 3 pages of introduction of Johari script, which PH reduce it from 6 pages to 3 pages, and we make it optional, meaning that choice are given to the parents for them to actually to agree or not to agree to let these 3 pages to be taught in the classroom. And however, even though I think the government, PH government, has made so much compromise, but eventually it's still a very big issue. as if this is the largest issues in the whole Chinese community. Another thing that I observe that is that, for example, when we do the reporting, because I think the readers are the Chinese speaking community, is the Chinese community, and therefore we tend to report things from the perspective of Chinese readers. However, sometimes it doesn't really show the correct picture. But I must admit, this is not the issue only happened in PH time. Even it happened even now, and also happened during Barisan National time, which I think it also make the community fail to understand the issue. For example, we'll talk about schools. We talk about the infrastructure in school, whether the school is in good condition. The Chinese media, of course, they will always report it in the way that as if only Chinese school has this problem. For example, teacher shortage. They will highlight Chinese school. Actually, we are facing Chinese teacher shortage. And at the moment, perhaps generally speaking, I think we have shortage about 800 to 1,000. Sometimes it's better than if the new batch of teacher just came in, maybe we still have a shortage of 500. But this issue also happened in Sekolah Kebangsaan, the national school, and also the secondary school, the national secondary school. But because the media failed to highlight this as well, and therefore sometimes the readers of the printed media will feel that, or will have this perception that this only happened to Chinese school. And also for school, because we talk about depleted school, actually majority of them are the schools in rural area, and therefore majority of them are actually national school. We call it Sekolah Kebangsaan or Sekolah Menengah Kebangsaan, especially in Sabah and Sarawak, because of the development issues. Chinese school, yes, I would admit, sometimes certain school will have this issue, but it's definitely not as bad as the problem we face in Sekolah Kebangsaan, the national school, especially the depleted school. However, I think because when the media do their reporting, they only cater the interest and the need of the Chinese community. And therefore, we fail to highlight the picture, the overall picture that really happened in Malaysia. And therefore, I think to a certain extent, also fail to make the Chinese readers to understand the issue from a Malaysian perspective. But however, they only read it and understand it from a very Chinese perspective, which I think is something we all need to improve. We need to do better, because I think a majority of the non-Chinese or non-Malay readers, perhaps we don't like Utusan Malaysia. I think perhaps majority of Malay might not like Utusan Malaysia as well. But how do we prevent the other language, the other media also won't become another version of Utusan Malaysia? I think that is very real issue in Malaysia. Thank you. I stop here first.
Thank you, YB Ching. Now, YB Zairil.
Yeah, I suppose the anecdote I shared about the uncle in the market, two sentiments I think that really came out. Firstly, there was real anger towards the whole party hopping thing. Because that was the entire cause of the downfall, and this is real anger, not just with that uncle on the street. I think a lot of Malaysians generally feel the same. There is real resentment towards MPs who were voted in and then subsequently leave to join and cause the downfall of the coalition government. And I think that was probably the predominant sentiment. But secondly, you're right in a sense that somehow, surprisingly and unsurprisingly, there is also a bit of a retreat, right? Rather than say, maybe it is because DAP did not compromise enough and that we should, take a more compromising view. There's I suppose, a more innate tendency to say, no, actually we should just retreat, fight it out on our own, forget about everyone else, just go there and do that. Now, definitely that sentiment does exist, and it also exists within the party membership. But I suppose then that's where the role of the leadership comes in, right? It is the role of the leaders to guide, to lead, and to convince our members to go down whichever road that we feel is the right way. Now, this is the exact same situation prior to 2018 when we decided to put Mahathir up. as our Prime Minister candidate. Can you imagine? This is the man who for years we vilified him. He put our leaders in jail. We blame him for everything. And suddenly we are saying he's going to be our Prime Minister. It was not easy. Our leaders had to go state to state, speak to all the members and really convince them, firstly, to allow Dr. Mahathir to be our leader. Secondly, not even to use the rocket as the symbol in the election. We actually used the PKR logo. These were not easy decisions, but again, that's where the leadership has to play a role in trying to convince. And so far, I feel that the leadership would be able to do that. Now, the second question, I agree that the situation definitely isn't the same as before, right? Because prior to that, we were, eternal opposition, and eternal opposition can promise the moon, which we did in our manifesto to a certain degree. But now, having been in government, definitely the situation is different. But I suppose the point I was trying to make is that political sentiments can change very quickly. But it also doesn't change by coincidence, right? So it's also up to us. It's up to our party, it's up to our coalition to really craft that narrative and turn all this anger that is out there, people who are seething, people who are now suddenly lost hope and don't want to participate in electoral democracy anymore, turn all that into some kind of hope for the next general election. And yes, we were in government, but it was also a government that met a premature end. And it's very unfortunate because I suppose the plan of any government is always to do the unpopular things up front. First, second year, you do all the unpopular things. Then you start dishing out the goodies in the third, fourth, fifth year. I suppose we would have gone down that road as well, but we never got the chance. And but finally, I just want to say, we still have our state governments in Selangor, in Penang, also in today's case, in Negeri Sembilan. And we have a strong track record in Penang, in Selangor. So I think this is also something that can be built on, that we can use as a, to convince people.
Thank you, YB. I would like to go a little bit into the weeds of the DAP party elections that is currently ongoing. YB Naching, of course, had just gone through a really tough contest as presented by the media, but perhaps not because she came in second above her boss, so a bit awkward. But joking aside, why is it much more maybe active, that the competition is much more fought over than usual? Is it about issues like, the direction of the party, Chineseness, Mahathir, partners, or is it about intensified factionalism? Even though the current leaders seem to have retained overwhelming support from the party, and perhaps Mr. Anthony Loke would likely take over as Secretary General. So just a bit curious about what is happening in the dynamics of the party, and overall also, what is the significance of this year's party election for DAP? Other parties are having trouble, holding party elections, badly needed party elections, but you guys have gone through this, are going through it now. But what is the significance? You're going to have a new SecGen, and more of your younger leaders are coming to the fore. So what we would like to know is there going to be a transition in leadership that will lead to a certain shift in things like the image of the party as a Chinese party, or anti-Malay, or elitist? Just today I saw an article in Malaysia Kini on how the party has gone elitist and is not taking care of workers. So some of these issues, would the party election this year and the leadership transition, at least formally, would that have an impact for the party's image and actual direction? And perhaps we could ask Prof. Weiss to share her views first before we go to the two YBs. Thank you, Prof.
Sure. Seems a little unfair given that they are
actually sorry.
That's all right. So I will take the less, I'll take the outsider view, which is to say that in some ways we can look at what these elections, the state elections, or party elections do, is suggest how unified or how divided the party is, whether or not there can be a civil reconciliation away from factionalism. And I think actually there have been very positive signs in that direction. I think another really key thing to note in these state level party machinations is that this is one of the things that occurs to me is that in some ways PAS has had the choice over the years of having control of Kelantan, maybe Terengganu, but really Kelantan, or being making a play for national power. And that's been, you see real differences in PAS strategy of when they decide, you know what, we're just going to control Kelantan and not really try to adapt ourselves to a coalition that would move us forward, versus really trying to cooperate with a national coalition such that they can, you know, be part of the federal government. And this is a way that the DAP can show that it still is avoiding that trade-off, because that is actually somewhat surprising for the DAP, is that there would be an obvious possibility for the DAP to say, look, we're strong in Penang. Let's focus our attention on Penang, keep our strongest people in Penang, not move them off to Johor, and really decide that we are to be a state power. That's a Gerakan approach in some ways too, which was dictated by coalition politics, but was still, you know, clearly a choice that the party makes. And so I think by showing that there are like thick, deep ranks of leaders in the party with different visions, with a range of expertise and perspectives outside the main stronghold of the party, that actually is a really important show that the DAP is, it's a reminder that it is actually still the largest parliamentary faction, but that it is actually a party with real substance in other states. So that, especially when so many other parties right now seem to be in just a state of meltdown, I think it has an important signaling effect, even if what we see highlighted in media or elsewhere is the extent to which there are factions. Because to have factions, you actually need to have enough people who are invested in the party and who really want to see something in their future in the party that they'll actually vie for that sort of control. And so now I'll turn it over to people who might vie for that control.
Thank you. YB Zairil on YB and Ching first?
Sure. Okay.
Okay, Zairil?
Well, I think, well, actually, Meredith gave a very good answer. Pretty much sums up the situation. Might be an outsider view, but I think it's quite, you know, it gives a very good idea into what's actually going on and what it means, this state election, I mean, party election. But I suppose the significance of this year's party elections is that, you know, it's an election after the loss of our federal government. So, you know, it would also, you know, it would be that opportunity for, you know, critics or brickbats within the party who disagree with maybe how decisions that were made leading up to the downfall of the government. It would be an opportunity for them to express these views. And it's also very crucial because this will be the election that would determine the lineup of the leadership going into the next general election, which means, you know, obviously repercussions in candidacy selection and so on. So extremely important, but also because of the transition, the change of leadership, because Mr. Guan Eng's term obviously has ended, and there would likely be a new, there will be a Secretary General, a new Secretary General. So yes, it's extremely important, and one of the main issues that has cropped up, I suppose, you know, recently there was a statement by a leader in Selangor who talked about the DAP diluting its Chinese-ness to a certain extent. But it, you know, it's like what I say. These sentiments do exist within the party, but I dare say it is not the mainstream sentiment. You know. I think what is important is that we continue to see the DNA, the structure, the leadership, the official policy statements from the leaders and the main leadership of the party, all extolling multi-ethnic, multicultural, multiracial views. I mean, the fact is, does everyone in the party share the same exact vision of what the party is? Obviously not. It's the same for any party, any organization. And especially for DAP historically, you know, we created in the late 60s, right? In a very, in a time of our history full of turmoil. It was post-separation, you know, the whole Malaysia separation. And in the first general election that DAP contested in was 1969, which we all know is probably one of the most heated elections, resulting in the racial riots of May 13th. And post 69, the Barisan National Grand Coalition was formed. And DAP was actually the only party, really, well, the only party worth talking about that did not join the BN. PAS joined the BN, Gerakan joined the BN. And so that basically meant that for the first half of the 1970s, DAP was essentially the only opposition party in the Malaysian parliament. And as the only opposition party, you end up becoming the de facto champion of all the fringe issues, all the minority issues, because who else would champion it, right? So fringe Malay issues, even DAP had to talk about them, fringe Chinese issues, fringe Indian issues, for example, and couple that with the total control of the media, during that time, 60s, 70s, 80s, all the way up to the 90s. So the DAP had really no other way of getting themselves into, into the limelight besides sensationalizing, again, fringe and minority issues. So you would imagine that over this period of time, a lot of members joined DAP, having this idea of what DAP is, right? A party for championing fringe issues and minority issues. So it wasn't really until the mid-2000s, when Lim Guan Eng took over as Secretary General, that there was a sort of a very concerted shift in the party. I think in 2006, in our party conference, I think our Guan Eng, he talked about middle Malaysia and the need for DAP to become now a more mainstream party. And of course, that resulted in 2008, we were able to win government in Perak, Selangor, Kedah, Penang at the time. And you would imagine also this then might create a conflict between leaders of members who joined sort of post 2006, post 2008, with a very different idea of what DAP is, a party that wants to govern, a party that wants to be part of the government, which means a party that's able to compromise, as opposed to perhaps members who had a very different idea of what DAP is. But again, so far over the years since then, the leadership has shown that they have been able to steer the ship and get everyone on board, whether everyone completely agrees or not, but generally there is strong support for the leadership's mandate to bring the party to continue on this mainstream sort of line, and then to be a viable coalition partner for future coalition governments in Malaysia.
Thank you, YB Niching.
Okay. Both of them spoke very well. So I think, okay, first of all, I do think that, of course, I think I totally agree with Zairil that the feeling or the feeling of insecure that we are actually the Chinese-ness, the Chinese in DAP, I think it's real. I think it's definitely real. But I think leaders like Xiang has taken on this opportunity to continue to explain and also to educate our members what is the real Malaysian dream. So yes, I think in Johor we seems to have one of the very most fierce and also widely reported state party election. And thank you. Even though the result seems that we did well, but however, actually the margin is very close. I think the margin is very close. But I think I look at it very positively, because I think eventually it's also an opportunity for us to explain to the general public, also especially to our members, that what does Malaysian dreams really means. When we start campaigning or we start helping the Malay communities, or actually sometimes we take an approach to defend the Bahasa Kebangsaan, our national language, does it mean that actually we impose a threat to our Chinese? So is the perception that we the Chinese, the Chinese, in DAP, is it real or is it a fake one? I think it's actually an opportunity for us to go out and explain. And therefore, Kit Siang took the very firm stand. I think you can see that in his recent statement, even though I would say Johari is no longer the issue now, but actually in his recent statement, he keep on repeating that and try to explain the party stand, or at least his stand at that point in time, and try to convince people you see, we are not speaking differently when we were in government and when we were not in the government. So we have a very consistent stand in all these issues, and then why this is actually inconsistent with Malaysian dreams or Malaysia's Malaysia, and is not really imposing a threat to so-called the Chinese community, etc. And therefore, he even said that he's willing to contest in this coming CC election, which is going to be held in June, hopefully not to be affected by the MCO or the COVID-19, but he is prepared to be voted down if eventually the general majority of the party actually thinks that this is not the direction we want to go through. Then he is willing to be voted down and to lose in the CEC election, but I think and I hope this won't happen. So I think communication is very important. Communication is very important. Previously, we used to campaign for the minority, but of course, when our membership increased, and then we have more and more non-Chinese members, especially Malay members joining. So of course, we see things from different perspectives as well. And then sometimes certain issues also came within our knowledge, and then we start campaigning for that as well. But it doesn't mean that we are not speaking for the minority in the country. I think we are consistent on that. We're campaigning issue based on our Malaysian dream, the Malaysia's first. This is our ideology, and I think we take this as opportunity for us to explain the issue. However, I think label and framing usually is because of faction, and it's also because of the media. Like for example, they call yesterday after the last Sunday after our Johor DAP party election ended, some media said that this is the victory of elitists, which I totally disagree, because I mean, how do you define elitist? I mean, I assume all people actually am I considered as an elitist, or Zairil considered as elitist because I was the deputy minister and he is still the EXCO. Right, because it's very difficult for you to not to call our reps in the government not elitist, right? Or if are we classifying elitist or not, or grassroots because of the education background? I have a law degree, yes, but people seeming to be not within our team, like the ex-chairperson of DAP Johor, he has, I think, more than one PhD degree as well. So is he not the elitist? So I think all this actually is framing, and actually sometimes is a little bit illogical if you really go to analyze it, because yes, if you talk about education background, I don't know whether having a law degree is considered elitist, but because I think people having at least a degree in Malaysia is actually getting more and more as well. So if that is the definition of elitist, I think it's a little bit weird as well. And I also do believe that a lot of our leaders is very, very approachable, and we keep in touch with grassroots very, very well as well. So I think all this label and framing actually is manipulated. Sometimes, yes, for the party election agenda, but sometimes also play out by the media.
Thank you, YB. We should move to the Q&A session pretty soon, but I think I have maybe 2 or 3 questions more. The next question would be on how DAP plans to engage key segments of the electorate going forward, including the Malays, the youth, women, and East Malaysians. For instance, the Wanita Wing demand for mandatory 30% women's representation at all levels have faced some pushback, because of course incumbents would feel like they are going to be losing out. They'll be losing out. So these are the various groups that we think we would like to hear how you're going to engage them and cultivate them. On the youth, why did DAP fail to attract Syed Saddiq to the party? He wants a party for the young, with a multiracial agenda. Shouldn't that be DAP as well? So what does it say about not just DAP actually, but current politics, that he felt compelled to start a new party? Will a Muda Warisan Partisan partnership in East and West Malaysia cannibalize votes from PH? So, and another sub point is what would be the effects of the government implementing or not voting for 18-year-olds and automatic registration. I think a lot of people assume that that would be good for the opposition, but some people say not necessarily so. The young have gone through the school system and they may be quite inclined to continue to support the establishment. So would Prof like to go first on opportunities and how the DAP has been doing in terms of engaging these key segments, and particularly the youth, which is Prof's specialty. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just touch on a couple of things. I'll leave the DAP's actual strategy to those who are DAP actual strategists rather than trying to second guess what they might be doing. So in terms of the Undi 18, my own take is that the reason that this first ever bipartisan amendment could pass is that all parties assume that they're going to win, that they have youth votes. And I think that really reflects the reality of Malaysian life. So Merdeka Center has some fairly recent survey data, for instance, of youth in Malaysia, finding that, actually we see the youth fighting in Taiwan and Hong Kong and Thailand and Myanmar and assume that youth are always progressive and democratic and yada yada yada, and there's no reason to assume that, right? Especially in a place in which we have a history of patronage politics. We have a history, especially among rural voters. It's not just a question of identity politics. That's an oversimplification. But if your family farm is, if you're a paddy farmer who's dependent on support that has always come through UMNO, for instance, it would be foolhardy to risk rejecting that, especially if you're not really given a clear message of why. So for that sort of reason, or also because to say support for opposition, even in Malaysia, does not tell you what type of opposition. Does that mean, as of the last election, for instance, as of GE14, does that mean you vote for PAS or does that mean you vote for Pakitan? Those are very different visions of what Malaysian politics should be, each equally valid to those who hold those particular ideological perspectives. So that to me signals the fact that we assume that youth vote in fundamentally different ways, and that's not necessarily the case. For most, many if not most, they undoubtedly vote according to how their parents have socialized them to vote, or how their friends vote, or if they're a kampong that's largely UMNO or a keadilan or whatever else, that's how they'll vote. And so in that sense, that's part of why these civic education initiatives are really intriguing, because just to lower the voting age in and of itself doesn't tell us how individuals will vote. And again, I think that's why it passed. But if that's accompanied by a really serious effort to change rhetoric, to get individuals to think through what their priorities actually are, that's intriguing. So I think of initiatives, for instance, BEAM's Bangsa Malaysia initiative, which is kind of stealing the discourse from, the PAP/Malaysian Solidarity Convention / later DAP of really trying to promote a multiracial vision. I mean, that's a really intriguing shift for Malaysia. But that leads me to Syed Saddiq and Muda. And so any first past the post majoritarian electoral system has a centripetal approach. Having a small third party is not a way to win. So as a strategy to set up your own small party with a clearly limited catchment, to say that we are for youth, not just youth, but progressive youth specifically with these agenda items, rather than trying to bring those issues into a larger party, seems to me a strategy for building up support and a sense of independent identity prior to being chased by larger parties. And that may be the cynical take. I have obviously not discussed with Syed Saddiq. I'm purely speculating, but it does seem that this might be a way to say, look, I have something I can bring to the party, and then see which party best adapts to that agenda or best aligns with that agenda. So that is a very cynical take, I understand, but it otherwise, Muda, even if it's registered, just stands little practical chance in the Malaysian system, even if voters are sympathetic to its agenda. And now I'll turn things over to those who actually know what DAP is doing with these areas.
Okay, about women's, I think, first of all, DAP, we amend our party constitution. So in this coming CEC election in June, that is the first time that we will see 30% women sitting in the CEC. So I think that is the good thing. Yes, we were trying to amend the party constitution, which was like many years ago, because we have some issue with RSIS, but I'm not going back to the history. But we did the amendment to our party constitution, and I still remember that actually this became an issue in two-party convention. The first one, of course, is the convention where we actually passed the amendment to the party constitution, and the following party convention still got members actually try to raise the issue and protest about this women quota, because in Malaysian context, quota is seen to be a system that is unfair. Because I think in Malaysia, we used to have like quota to enter university, and therefore it deprived many bright students, especially those from the non-Movie Putra family, their right to enter university were denied, and therefore in DAP, in our party, a lot of our members are actually against any quota system. But I would say the women's in the party, we are quite lucky and quite fortunate. I was sitting in the party constitution review committee, so when I proposed this agenda, it was supported by Mr. Anthony Locke. He is the organizing secretary, and therefore he was also the chair for the review committee. And of course, we got other colleagues like Liu Chintong, like Tony Hua, who also fully support the quota system for women. And therefore, eventually, I think at the CC level, we have no problem to actually include 30%, to impose a 30% quota. And when we went to the convention, we took a vote, and luckily we actually able to pass this part as well. However, I think as to 30% women candidates, it's not something that we don't have a fixed quota system yet for the women candidate. So it really depends on the chairperson and also the party leader to scout talent. I think in Johor, we so far, like we have like 5 MPs, but out of 5, we have three are women. So it's myself, Wong Shuki for Guang, and also Bean for Buckley. But however, we also have state like Selangor, whereby we have 4 MP, but none of them are women. Are women, sorry, are female. So I think, but however, having said that, in Selangor, we have quite a numbers. We have about 1/3 of women state assembly persons as well. So I think for us to fill more women candidates, I think for the party, I think the leadership surely don't have this problem. It's just like, how do we find a suitable candidate and also to put them in, because in terms of party structure, women membership actually is around 25% only. It's around 25% only. And you know, as the competition become more and more intensified, the expectation or the entry point for you to become a candidate is become higher and higher. I was a very lucky candidate because I joined the party in the year 2008 in January. February, I became the candidate. March, I become the MP. But however, this is unlikely to repeat in the near future, because we have more and more party workers already. So we have like people working as a local councillor, we have people working as a village heads, and they need to put in effort and time in the party before they actually can get the endorsement from the grassroots and also from the leadership, whether it's division or at the state. And of course, this is always a challenge for women, because unless they are very strong financially, otherwise for women, especially young women who are young mothers, etc., it's quite unlikely for them to invest that much of time and effort in the party for party work. But however, I still believe that DAP is a very women-friendly party, and we have a lot of not just among the women ourselves, but also we got a lot of support from our male colleagues as well. So I still believe that for any person who has the potential, who has the interest to become a candidate, approach DAP, you always get the higher chances.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, YB. YB Zairil, youth, East Malaysia.
Yeah. So, firstly, I want to say I didn't realize we were trying to court Syed Saddiq. But really,
shouldn't you be?
To your question about why he may have felt compelled to start his own party and not join, DAP or any other party, I think there's a question you have to ask Syed Saddiq himself. No one here would know. Of course, Meredith has offered a speculative answer. which, you know, I'm in no position to know whether that's, you know, anywhere near the truth or not. However, your question on will a Muda Warisan partnership sort of cannibalize support and so on, really, I think we are taking the approach of seeing, you know, again, these other elements in the opposition bloc, you know, Muda, Pejuang, Warisan or whatever, as part of the larger opposition bloc. And end of the day, because we have a first past the post system, it will all depend on the seat negotiations. I mean, if you have 3-corner, 4-corner fight, then yes, cannibalization is likely to happen. But if you're able to agree on a seat sharing formula, then that's where you can concentrate resources in terms of you know, votes. So when it comes to youth, I mean, I have to say, one of the reasons I joined DAP, and I joined in 2010, so it's been 11 years. I was young then.
Still young, still young.
Excuse me, we are still young, Zairil.
I think Ching and I are the same age, right? We're the same age, I think.
She's younger than you. She looks younger than
she's
you.
younger. Really?
Looks younger, thank you. You're very kind.
Younger than me. I think we're almost the same age. So basically not past 40, I think. But okay, one of the reasons I joined DAP actually was that I saw at the time DAP had a lot of opportunity for young people. And this really attracted me. I mean, like what Ching said, if you want to have an opportunity to serve, and you look at all the parties, you know, in front of you, I think DAP would be the one that would, you know, if you're capable enough and you're able to, you know, show that you merit a chance, then you would be given that chance. You know, it's not a party that's very hierarchical, that you have to wait 30, 40 years to get a chance to contest and so on. Now, so obviously we are the party with the most number of young leaders. Depends however you define young, we have the most number whether it's 35, 30 or 40, it doesn't matter. And of course, we were big supporters of the Undi 18 campaign. And I think the important thing is that we are very committed to the empowerment of all these groups. Like you talk about youth, women, I think Ching explained very well. And you know, and for youth, obviously you're looking at how do you help them in terms of employment, education, enterprise. I suppose these are the, you know, some of the key things that the youth, you know, want to be or feel they need help in. So, and I suppose when it comes to some of the state policies that we have, you know, implemented in Penang, in Selangor as well, targeted at young entrepreneurs, you know, giving them loans, giving them grants to start businesses. You know, in Penang, we even had this scheme where we have an agency called Digital Penang, and what we did during this COVID, we realized a lot of people needed extra money and employment. We hired part-time, you know, young workers, train them in digital literacy, and make them go out to you know, basically just, you know, sign people up for digital wallets, sign people up, and we're now actually assisting SMEs in Penang using our sort of workforce as a sort of a sales team for Penang SMEs. You know, so these guys go out, try to you know, get people to sign up to digital platforms and things like this. So it's about trying to provide what, you know, what they need, what they want, and also a lot of reassurance, especially when it comes to Malay youth and Malays in general. I think one of the key things that DAP constantly has to do is reassurance. You know, firstly, that we're not here to steal all their rights and take their land away, which is one thing, but also that we will take care of their welfare. I think when it comes to dealing with Malays in particular, you need to have a very welfare-oriented approach, which actually we have been doing. In Penang, if you look at our policies since 2008, you know, which Guan Eng started, we have a lot of social welfare and assistance programs, you know, designed, you know, simply, you know, it's not targeted at Malays, it's targeted towards the vulnerable groups. It just so happens that, you know, many of the vulnerable groups, you know, are made up of predominantly Malays. So obviously they see that a DAP-led government can be effective in helping them. We have managed to reduce the Gini coefficient, which is the inequality gap in Penang, by leaps and bounds since 2008. and just raised household income levels, provided employment, and again, it's about hitting all those notes like employment, education, enterprise, so things like this, without being particularly, saying we want to help a certain race or whatever. And I suppose that's the kind of approach that DAP has always had, which I think, if we do it enough, it can be effective in targeting these groups.
Thank you, YB. We really have to move to Khir and the audience. Thank you so much. We'll move to Q&A now. Pia, please.
Thank you, Ariel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pia Sukhani, and I'm a research analyst with the Malaysia program at RSIS. So I'd like to direct the first question to YB Ching and YB Zairil. How will the DAP determine which parties it should work with both before and after the general election, taking into account the sentiment of its grassroots? Might the DAP form a governing coalition with UMNO depending on the results of the next general election? And we have a question from Amy Chu, which is also a tangential question. Is DAP split on the issue of working with UMNO? Are you concerned that this would result in DAP losing support from your voters as it goes against Pakatan Harapan's platform of fighting corruption? And what are the current voter sentiments towards DAP, and how might that change if the party may end up with different partners later on? YB Ching?
Okay, first of all, I think at the moment we are staying with Amanah and also PKR, and I think we are hoping to form a working relationship with Muda and also Warisan. I think at this moment UMNO is out of picture. However, if you talk about, and I hope with PH together with Muda and also Warisan, we would be able to win sufficient seat to form government in next GE. I think the issues that whether DAP is going to prepare to work with UMNO only arises is if PH together with Warisan and Muda, we are unable to win more than 112. Because that is only under that type of situation, then if we are the largest party, let's say if among PM, because the likely situation will be PH, UMNO, BN, and also PN. So if none of us actually won more than simple majority, but PH happened to be the largest one, then of course we will be given the top priority to talk about other parties, to talk about forming a government. And I think that will be a choice of PH and not just DAP alone. So I think the stance of DAP is very clear on this. First of all, from now until the next GE, I don't think we are talking to UMNO about forming a coalition to work together in the next coming election. I think on certain specific issues, we are willing to work together. For example, calling for parliament sitting. I think at least this is our common agenda. I think UMNO leaders also want to see parliament sitting. Even the deputy speaker who has been criticizing the PM government for suspending the parliament. So on issue on certain agenda, I think DAP is always very open, meaning that if we feel that this issue and this agenda is good for the nation, then we are willing to work with any party. So even when we were the government, when we were the opposition, we would not have any. Sometimes we also support certain bills tabled by the government because we think this is good for the nation. But I think the situation for us to work together with UMNO, it will only arise if we are unable to win more than 112. So I hope we are able to win more than 112. And if we do not, then of course I think any working relationship with any other party is based on the agenda, meaning that we need to sit down and discuss about what we are going to implement. So this will be a coalition partner, and before we form a coalition partner, I think we need to have a coalition agreement whereby we need to state down what is going to be the agenda for this government, and what are the things that we want to push, and what are the things that all parties don't touch. So this is my view. Thank you.
Thank you, YB Ching. YB Zairil?
Okay, it's a good question. I think Malaysia is a very interesting country because we're a federation, right? But we don't really behave like a federation. I mean, structurally we do to a certain degree, but typically you would see in many federations like India, the United States or Australia, Germany, a higher degree of decentralization, which we don't really have in Malaysia. Now, so Malaysia is an atypical federal federation. Now, similarly, well, in the sense that we are very centralized, right, in terms of decision-making power. Similarly, our politics is also very centralized. So you have basically a federation, you have different regions and states with very, very different dynamics, yet the politics is still very centralized. Now, a number of years ago, I presented a paper at ANU where I talked about the possibility of decentralized politics or decentralized coalitions in Malaysia. And at the time, of course, this is before 2018. And at the time, I remember everyone saying, oh, this is also theoretical. Something like this can never happen in Malaysia. In fact, I think Shamsul AB was there and he actually said that to me. But today, we are staring at we're looking at the possibility that, this could happen, even if it doesn't happen in the next general election, it could happen, and very well, it's likely to happen at some time in the future. In fact, when you talk about different configurations and coalitions at the different states and at federal level, Perak is a good example where, we successfully teamed up with UMNO and not only brought down the Bersatu Menteri Besar, but also signed a confidence and supply agreement with the state government. And as a result, our DAP reps in Perak today, they enjoy the same allocations in terms of financial perks and so on for the constituency as those of the government, as assemblymen from the government. We have also ensured that we are invited for government meetings and so on. So cooperation can happen. I think Perak is probably a good precursor of what may happen. And just because we cooperate with UMNO in Perak doesn't mean we have to cooperate with them, for example, in Penang or in Selangor or at federal level. Or even if you do have cooperation at any of these states, it doesn't mean that it has to be replicated exactly. So it's something that Malaysia is not used to. We are just used to having, okay, BN coalition or PR or PH coalition or whatever it is, and then, it's supposed to be uniform throughout. I think this is extremely unnatural because different regions have different dynamics and different needs. If you look at Germany, for example, you have different coalitions at the state levels, you have different coalitions at the federal level, same party can have different partners at different levels. So I think all this is, the possibilities are quite exciting. And Ching is right that a lot of it will be dictated by necessity. So, for example, in Perak, if you come, situation, next election, you sort of have a hung situation, then yes, you may have to, come up with some arrangement which will fit Perak, but which may not necessarily be the same in other states, So, interesting times.
Thank you, YB. For our next question, it's all related with the future of DAP. So we have a question from Daniel To. What are the challenges for the new generation of DAP leaders and how do their views and responses differ from the earlier generation? Amy Chu is also asking, is Anthony Lok a front runner to become the next DAP SecGen? And more broadly, how will future leaders of the DAP strengthen the party's current trajectory? Is there room for new ideas from the new generation of DAP leaders? And what will it take for the younger leaders to succeed? Maybe we can have Ching, YB Ching to answer that.
Is Anthony Lok the frontliner for the next section? My answer is yes, because he is my choice as well. I believe perhaps for Zairil as well, but I cannot speak on behalf of Zairil. But I think for many of us within the current CEC, I think yes, I think he is deemed to be the most suitable candidate, and I think a lot of people, even like Chin Tong, even recently Tony also mentioned that yes, we pledge our support and we think Anthony is suitable to lead. I think about new ideas, I think yes, I think definitely DAP is a very young party. I think we even in our CEC line out, or even in our state line out, or even at the candidate line out, we always have a lot of young people. I think DAP is always the party who filled the youngest candidate, or at least the youngest MPs and even Adun. When I was elected in the parliament in the year 2008, I was 27. That term I was the youngest one. And then next term, it was like 2013, Zairil was the youngest MP. Zairil was the youngest MP. And currently, I think, because of Saturday, we are no longer the record holder. But again, our youngest MP, she is Vivian Wong. She's from Sadakan. She is about 30 years old as well. So I think for DAP, we always feel young candidate. We have no problem to feel young candidate. And I believe DAP is actually, our leadership are actually giving rooms to a lot of young people to express their ideas, express their views. And therefore you can see from Kit Siang's Facebook, from Guan Ying's Facebook, or from our DAP Malaysia's Facebook, we always have dialogue. We always have dialogue with our young members, with different members from different backgrounds, etc. So yes, I believe that DAP should be the top choice for young people.
Thank you, YB Ching. YB Zairil, I'd like to ask you the next question. Why does DAP have such a hard time setting expectations more clearly and driving an inclusive policy agenda rather than reacting to public sentiment? This question is from Lee Huok On. He says that, I think the hardcore base and middle ground will understand if DAP had clarified to them that UAC, for example, because it involves public university admissions, which have limited spaces, will take more time and compromise. But we didn't hear such expectation settings. DAP is unfairly maligned, sure, but it also paints itself into a corner. DAP got embroiled defending minority interests in ethnic quotas for matriculation colleges, but DAP never publicly gave assurance of its commitment to vast Bumiputra programs, especially in TVET. DAP seemingly cannot get itself to firmly support anything MARA, except obligatory nods during budget time. Why?
Well, that's a good question. Now, I suppose, yes, I agree that much more can be done in terms of agenda setting and just create framing of the narrative, so to speak. Now, a lot of the points raised is actually, well, I think DAP, if you look at our official statements, the stands from the leadership and so on, we do address these issues, but you're right in the sense that people don't know them, it doesn't get across. And that is essentially our problem. I mean, if I had a good answer to, then we wouldn't have this problem, right? But we're trying. It doesn't help. I think Ching explained earlier as well, how the media can be extremely manipulative. So, you know how during the whole Jawi script issue, for example, I mean, just complete manipulation by some parts of the media. And no matter how we explain and what we explain, that doesn't really get across because then you're manipulated by the ones who deliver the story lah. But also very interestingly in Malaysia, we have this situation because we're multilingual, right? We're multicultural and multilingual, and like Ching said, so is the media, right? So you have very different perspectives in the different language media. This is something extremely, different. If you're an English reading person, for example, you would have a completely different idea of certain issues than if you were Chinese reading or Malay reading. And perhaps, that's where the huge challenge is also for DAP. And some of our communication is also sometimes inconsistent in the different contexts, and perhaps that doesn't help. What we need to do is, of course, first of all, try to be as consistent as possible. And secondly, we also really need to improve in terms of communication and delivery of that. I feel not just DAP, but the entire Pakatan Harapan government could have done far much better in terms of communication and PR during the 22 months that we were in power. And I think perhaps if you look back and you look at lessons that we can take away from that period of time, is probably that was probably one of the main things that we could have done much better lah. I mean, the whole Jawi issue is one great example of how communications not done right resulted in just huge public backlash, and we were just getting attacked from all sides, right? So yes, there it is.
Thank you so much, YB. I'll now pass over to Ariel. Ariel, over to you, please.
Thank you, Pia. I'm sorry we could not get through all the questions. We hope you have enjoyed yourselves and found this useful. I would like to thank our speakers and participants very much for giving us your time. I would also like to thank our events team for their wonderful support. Have a good day and may the force be with you. Thank you.